The rain hammered down like 1,000 needles on Marcus Bennett's face as he knelt on the wet pavement, his trembling hands clutching a crumpled $20 bill, the last money he had in the world to feed his 6-year-old son waiting at home. "Please, Mr. Harrington," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking as cold water soaked through his threadbare jacket. "I just need one more week. My son, he hasn't eaten a proper meal in 3 days." Richard Harrington stood above him, immaculate in his $1,500 suit, not a drop of rain touching him under his designer umbrella. His eyes were cold, devoid of any trace of compassion as he looked down at the man kneeling before him like he was examining something distasteful on the bottom of his shoe. "Get up, Bennett," Richard said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're embarrassing yourself. And more importantly, you're embarrassing me and this company." Marcus struggled to his feet, his legs weak from exhaustion and hunger. He'd been working double shifts at Harrington Industries for 3 months, ever since his wife Sarah died in that car accident, leaving him alone with little Jamie. The medical bills had devoured their savings, the funeral costs had taken everything else. And now, standing outside the corporate headquarters on 5th Avenue in downtown Chicago, Marcus was facing the final collapse of everything he'd been fighting to hold together. "I've given this company everything," Marcus said, his voice stronger now despite the trembling in his hands. "I've worked weekends, holidays, overnight shifts. I've never complained, never asked for special treatment. I'm just asking for one more week to catch up on my rent, so I don't lose the apartment. Jamie needs stability. He's already lost his mother." Richard's lips curled into something that might have been a smile on a different man, but on him it looked like a sneer. "You know what your problem is, Bennett. You think the world owes you something because you've had a rough time. Newsflash, nobody cares about your sob story. This is business. You're 3 weeks behind on the productivity quotas. You show up looking like a homeless person. You're bringing down the morale of the entire warehouse division." The rain intensified, turning the street into a river of reflected neon lights and car headlights. Marcus could see other employees leaving the building, some glancing their way but quickly averting their eyes, not wanting to get involved. He recognized Tom Bradshaw from accounting, Jennifer Mills from human resources, even old Pete from maintenance, people he'd helped, shared lunch with, considered friends. Not one of them stopped. "I can make up the productivity," Marcus insisted, taking a step closer. "Give me a chance to prove it. I'll work harder. "You'll what?" Richard interrupted, his voice rising now, theatrical, as if he wanted the gathering crowd to hear. "You'll magically become competent. You'll suddenly stop being a drain on company resources. Look at yourself, Bennett. You're pathetic. You come here begging like some kind of charity case. This is a Fortune 500 company, not a homeless shelter." The words hit Marcus harder than any physical blow could have. He felt something inside him crack, something that had been holding him together through all the impossible days since Sarah died. His vision blurred, though whether from rain or tears, he couldn't tell anymore. "I have a son," Marcus said quietly, but with an intensity that made Richard take a half-step back. "A 6-year-old boy who's waiting for me to come home with food. Who asks me every night when things are going to get better, who still cries for his mother. I'm not begging for myself, I'm begging for him." For a moment, just a fraction of a second, something flickered in Richard's eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Maybe even the ghost of empathy, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that same cold indifference. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you became a burden," Richard said, straightening his tie. "Security already packed your locker. You're terminated, effective immediately. And Bennett?" He leaned in close enough that Marcus could smell his expensive cologne. "Don't even think about using me as a reference. As far as I'm concerned, you never worked here. Richard turned and walked away, his umbrella casting a perfect circle of dryness around him as he headed toward his Mercedes parked in the executive lot. Marcus stood there, frozen, watching him go. The $20 bill in his hand was now soaked, practically dissolving between his fingers. "Mr. Bennett?" A quiet voice came from behind him. Marcus turned to see Maria Rodriguez, one of the night-cleaning staff. She was in her 60s, a woman who'd always smiled at him, always asked about Jamie. "I heard what happened. I'm so sorry." She pressed something into his hand. 2 $50 bills, carefully folded. "For Jamie," she whispered. "I know what it's like to be hungry." No child should feel that. Marcus looked at the money, then at Maria's weathered face, and something broke completely inside him. "I can't take this," he said, trying to hand it back. "You work so hard for—" "You can, and you will," Maria said firmly, closing his fingers around the bills. "This isn't charity, mijo. This is one parent helping another. You'll pay it forward someday when you're back on your feet. I know you will." She squeezed his hand once, then shuffled back toward the building, disappearing through the service entrance before Marcus could protest further. The subway ride home was a blur. Marcus sat in the corner of the car, his wet clothes leaving a puddle on the floor, oblivious to the stares of other passengers. He clutched Maria's money in one pocket and his last 20 in the other, doing mental calculations. With $120, he could buy groceries for 2 weeks if he was careful, maybe pay part of the rent, buy a little time with the landlord. But then what? No job meant no income. No income meant they'd be on the streets within a month. The apartment building on Morrison Street looked even more depressing than usual when Marcus arrived. The elevator was broken again, so he climbed 5 flights of stairs, each step feeling like a mountain. Outside apartment 5C, he paused, wiping his face, trying to compose himself. Jamie couldn't see him like this. Jamie needed to believe his father had everything under control. He opened the door to find his son sitting at their small kitchen table, surrounded by drawings. Jamie looked up, his face lighting up in a smile that made Marcus's heart ache. "Daddy!" Jamie jumped up and ran to him, wrapping small arms around Marcus's waist. "You're all wet. Did it rain a lot?" "Yeah, buddy, it rained a lot," Marcus said, kneeling down to Jamie's level, forcing a smile onto his face. "But guess what? Daddy got paid today, so we're going to the store and getting some real food. How does spaghetti sound? With meatballs?" Jamie's eyes went wide. "Really? Real meatballs? Not just pasta?" "Really, real meatballs," Marcus promised, his heart breaking at how excited his son was about something so simple. "Go grab your jacket. We're going on an adventure." As Jamie ran to his room, Marcus caught sight of the drawings on the table. They were all of their family, him, Sarah, and Jamie, holding hands, smiling. In every picture they were together. In every picture they were happy. Marcus closed his eyes, letting himself have just one moment of complete despair. Then he opened them again, straightened his shoulders, and made a silent promise to the memory of his wife and to his son, sleeping in the next room. This wasn't the end. Somehow, some way, he would turn this around. He would make Richard Harrington regret this day. And he would prove that dignity and decency weren't weaknesses. They were strengths that would carry him further than any amount of cruelty ever could. But as he looked out the window at the rain-soaked city below, Marcus had no idea how he was going to keep that promise. All he knew was that he had to. For Jamie, for Sarah's memory, for himself. The night stretched ahead, full of uncertainty and fear, but also, somewhere deep inside, a tiny spark of determination that refused to be extinguished. That spark would have to be enough, because right now, it was all he had. 6 months had passed since that rainy night, and Marcus Bennett stood in the cramped one-bedroom apartment that had somehow become both his prison and his launching pad, staring at his laptop screen at 3 in the morning while Jamie slept peacefully in the bedroom. The transformation hadn't been sudden or dramatic. It had been built on a foundation of desperation, sleepless nights, and a burning determination that refused to die, no matter how many times reality tried to extinguish it. After losing his job at Harrington Industries, Marcus had spent 2 weeks in a fog of depression, sending out hundreds of job applications and receiving either silence or rejection. The rent had come due. The landlord, Mr. Chen, had knocked on the door with an eviction notice in hand. Marcus had opened the door, expecting the worst, but what he got instead changed everything. "Mr. Bennett," Mr. Chen had said, looking uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "I know you're going through hard time. My wife, she reminded me we were once in same position, new to country, no money, people not give us chance." He'd paused, folding the eviction notice and putting it back in his pocket. "You have 2 months, no rent. You get back on feet, then we talk about payment plan, okay?" Marcus had stood there, speechless, as Mr. Chen patted his shoulder and walked away. It was the second act of unexpected kindness in as many weeks, and it gave Marcus something he'd been running dangerously low on: time. He'd used that time to take stock of his situation with brutal honesty. He had a bachelor's degree in business management that he'd earned while working full-time, before Sarah, before Jamie, when he still believed the system rewarded hard work and education. He had 15 years of warehouse and logistics experience. He had a laptop that Sarah had bought him 3 Christmases ago, and he had nothing left to lose. The idea had come to him at 2 in the morning, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee and a notebook. Harrington Industries wasn't the only company struggling with logistics inefficiencies. During his time there, Marcus had seen countless problems: delayed shipments, miscommunicated orders, inventory nightmares that cost the company millions. He'd even suggested solutions to his supervisors, ideas that were dismissed or, worse, stolen and implemented without credit. What if he could offer those solutions to other companies? What if he could become a logistics consultant? The rational part of his brain had screamed that it was impossible. He had no clients, no reputation, no money to start a business. But the desperate part, the part that had watched his son divide a single hot dog into 3 meals, told him he had to try. Marcus had started small, almost impossibly small. He'd created a basic website using a free platform, written articles about supply chain optimization, and posted them on every business forum and LinkedIn group he could find. He'd offered free consultations to small businesses just to build a portfolio. He'd worked from the public library when he couldn't afford internet at home, studying every successful logistics company, every case study, every innovative solution he could find. The first real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Tom Chen, Mr. Chen's nephew, owned a small import business that was hemorrhaging money due to shipping delays and customs issues. Mr. Chen had mentioned Marcus's situation to his nephew, and Tom had agreed to a meeting more out of pity than genuine interest. Marcus had shown up to that meeting with a borrowed tie, a printed presentation, and 3 weeks of research into Tom's specific business problems. He'd identified 6 critical inefficiencies and presented a detailed plan to address each one. Tom had been skeptical, but desperate enough to implement Marcus's suggestions on a trial basis. Within 2 months, Tom's shipping costs had dropped by 30%, and his delivery times had improved by 45%. Tom had paid Marcus a modest fee and, more importantly, had referred him to 3 other business owners in his network. Now, 6 months later, Marcus was staring at an email that seemed too good to be true. David Morrison, CEO of Morrison & Partners, a mid-sized logistics firm, wanted to meet with him, not for a consultation, for a potential partnership. Marcus read the email for the 10th time, his hands shaking slightly. Morrison & Partners was respected, established, legitimate. They wanted to discuss innovative approaches to traditional logistics challenges and had specifically mentioned his articles on just-in-time inventory optimization. "Daddy," Jamie's sleepy voice came from the bedroom doorway. "Why are you awake? It's still dark outside." Marcus quickly minimized the email and turned to his son. Jamie stood there in his superhero pajamas, the ones Sarah had bought him, now too small but still his favorites, rubbing his eyes and clutching his worn, stuffed elephant. "Just working on something, buddy," Marcus said, opening his arms. Jamie shuffled over and climbed into his lap, immediately resting his head against Marcus's chest. "Go back to bed. You have school in a few hours." "Are we still poor?" Jamie asked quietly, and the question hit Marcus like a physical blow. They'd been so careful not to talk about money around Jamie, but kids weren't stupid. Jamie had noticed when they stopped going to restaurants, when his birthday party had been just the two of them with a homemade cake, when his classmates talked about vacations and new toys, while Jamie wore clothes from the donation bin at school. "We're doing better," Marcus said carefully, hugging his son tighter. "Remember how I told you Daddy started his own business? Well, it's growing. Slowly, but it's growing. And you know what? I got an email tonight from a really important person who wants to meet with me." Jamie looked up, his eyes, Sarah's eyes, bright with hope. "Does that mean we can get pizza? Real pizza from the restaurant, not frozen?" Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Yeah, buddy. When I finish this meeting, win or lose, you and me are getting the biggest pizza they have, with extra cheese. Deal?" "Deal!" Jamie grinned, then yawned widely. "Can I tell everyone at school my daddy is a businessman?" "You can tell them anything you want," Marcus said, carrying Jamie back to bed. "But right now you need to sleep so you can be awake for school tomorrow." After tucking Jamie in, Marcus returned to the kitchen and opened the email again. The meeting was scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. at Morrison & Partners' office in the financial district. 3 days away. 3 days to prepare the most important presentation of his life. Marcus spent those 3 days in a frenzy of preparation. He researched everything about Morrison & Partners, their clients, their competitors, their strengths and weaknesses. He refined his presentation, practiced it until he could deliver it in his sleep, and prepared for every possible question David Morrison might ask. On Friday morning, Marcus stood in front of the bathroom mirror in his only good suit, cleaned and pressed, borrowed shoes shined until they gleamed, and barely recognized the man staring back at him. He looked professional, confident, nothing like the desperate man who'd knelt in the rain 6 months ago. But inside, he still felt like that man, still felt the weight of uncertainty and fear. "You look like a superhero," Jamie said from the bathroom doorway, his eyes wide with admiration. Marcus smiled, adjusting his tie. "Just a regular guy trying to do something extraordinary, buddy. Mrs. Rodriguez is going to watch you after school until I get back, okay?" "Is this the big meeting?" Jamie asked. "This is the big meeting." "You're going to do great, Daddy," Jamie said with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "You're the smartest person I know." Marcus knelt down and hugged his son fiercely. "I love you, Jamie. Everything I do for you. Remember that." The Morrison & Partners building was everything Harrington Industries had been, but somehow warmer, more welcoming. The lobby had natural light, plants, employees who smiled at visitors instead of looking through them. Marcus gave his name to the receptionist, and within minutes he was being escorted to the executive floor. David Morrison was in his early 50s, with grey hair, kind eyes, and a firm handshake. His office was impressive, but not ostentatious, filled with books, industry awards, and family photos that spoke of a man who valued substance over appearance. "Mr. Bennett, thank you for coming," David said, gesturing to a comfortable chair. I've been following your work with great interest. Your article on predictive inventory modeling was particularly insightful. Where did you develop that approach? Marcus took a breath, deciding in that moment to be completely honest. I developed it out of desperation, Mr. Morrison. 6 months ago, I was fired from a logistics position for requesting a 1-week grace period while I got back on my feet after my wife's death. I was broke, had a young son to feed, and no prospects. So I started studying everything I could about logistics optimization because I had nothing left to lose. David's expression shifted from polite interest to genuine attention. You were fired for asking for help during a family crisis by a man named Richard Harrington, Marcus said, watching David's reaction carefully. David's eyes widened slightly. Harrington Industries. I know Richard. We've competed for several contracts over the years. He paused, choosing his words carefully. His approach to business is aggressive. His approach to people is worse. I'm sorry you experienced that. It motivated me, Marcus said simply. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives push us toward the best versions of ourselves. David leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with new intensity. I didn't bring you here just to compliment your articles, Mr. Bennett. I brought you here because Morrison and Partners is at a crossroads. We've grown steadily for 20 years, but we're hitting a ceiling. Our methods are solid but traditional. We need innovation, fresh perspectives, someone who understands both the technical side of logistics and the human side of business. Marcus's heart was pounding. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing a partnership, David said. Not as a consultant, as a full partner. You would head our innovation division, develop new methodologies, work directly with clients, and share in the company's profits. You'd have resources, support, and most importantly, autonomy to implement your ideas. Marcus sat in stunned silence. A partnership, resources, stability for Jamie, everything he'd been working toward, offered to him on a silver platter. It seemed impossible. Why me? Marcus asked. I'm sure you could hire someone with more experience, better credentials. Better credentials, David interrupted gently. Mr. Bennett, you rebuilt yourself from nothing in 6 months. You developed innovative solutions while living on the edge of homelessness. You maintained your integrity and your humanity through circumstances that would have broken most people. Those aren't credentials you can earn in a classroom. That's character, and character is what I value most in a partner. Marcus felt something shift inside him, like a weight he'd been carrying finally lifting. I have one condition, he said quietly. David raised an eyebrow. Name it. I want to be involved in the company's approach to employee welfare. Fair wages, family leave policies, support systems for people going through crisis. I never want another employee to feel what I felt standing in the rain, begging for basic human dignity. David smiled, and it was genuine, reaching his eyes. Mr. Bennett, I think this partnership is going to work out very well. When can you start? 18 months after that rainy night, Marcus Bennett walked through the glass doors of Harrington Industries, with his head held high, a leather portfolio under his arm, and a confidence that came not from arrogance, but from knowing exactly who he was and what he was worth. The lobby looked the same, cold marble floors, minimalist furniture, employees moving with the nervous energy of people who knew they were always being watched and evaluated. But Marcus wasn't the same man who'd been thrown out of this building. That man had been desperate, broken, begging. This man was a partner at Morrison and Partners, responsible for accounts worth $30 million, and he was here on business. Mr. Bennett? The receptionist looked up from her desk, professional smile in place. Mr. Harrington is expecting you in the executive conference room, 10th floor. Marcus nodded his thanks and headed toward the elevators, passing employees he recognized but who didn't recognize him. Why would they? The last time they'd seen him, he'd been wearing soaked, threadbare clothes, being publicly humiliated. Now he wore a tailored charcoal suit, Italian leather shoes, and carried himself like someone who belonged in these spaces. The elevator ride felt surreal. Marcus watched the numbers climb, 5, 6, 7, remembering the last time he'd been in this building, leaving through the service entrance with his belongings in a cardboard box. He'd sworn then that he would return, but he'd never imagined it would be like this. David Morrison had been the one to set up this meeting. Harrington Industries was struggling with massive supply chain failures that had cost them 2 major contracts in the past 6 months. Their stock price had dropped 15%, and in a twist that Marcus still found hard to believe, they'd reached out to Morrison and Partners for help. They specifically asked not to work with you, David had told Marcus over coffee the week before. Richard apparently still remembers your name, but here's the thing. You're my lead consultant on logistics restructuring. If they want our help, they get you. Your call whether you want to take this. Marcus had thought about it for exactly 3 seconds before saying yes. Not for revenge, he'd moved past that, but because he wanted Richard Harrington to see what he'd become. He wanted Richard to understand the cost of his cruelty, not in money, but in the loss of his own humanity. The conference room was everything Marcus expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago, a table that could seat 20 people, and Richard Harrington standing at the head of it, looking at his phone with the same air of self-importance Marcus remembered. Richard looked up as Marcus entered, and the recognition took a moment. When it hit, the change in Richard's expression was almost comical. Shock, confusion, then a desperate attempt to mask both behind professional courtesy. "Bennett," Richard said, his voice tight. "I wasn't expecting you." "Mr. Harrington," Marcus replied, his voice even, professional. He set his portfolio on the table and took a seat, deliberately choosing one at the opposite end, making Richard come to him if he wanted to have this conversation properly. "David Morrison sends his regards. He's tied up with another client today, so I'll be handling your consultation personally." Richard remained standing, his knuckles white as he gripped the back of a chair. "When Morrison said they were sending their lead consultant, I assumed..." "You assumed it would be someone else," Marcus finished calmly. "I understand. Let me start by introducing myself properly. Marcus Bennett, Senior Partner at Morrison & Partners, specializing in logistics optimization and supply chain restructuring. I've successfully managed accounts for 43 companies over the past 18 months, with an average cost reduction of 35% and efficiency improvements of up to 60%. He let that sink in, watching Richard's face cycle through emotions, disbelief, anger, something that might have been embarrassment. Behind Richard, the door opened, and 3 other executives filed in. Marcus recognized 2 of them. Jennifer Mills from HR and Robert Chen, the CFO. They didn't recognize him. "Shall we begin?" Marcus asked, opening his portfolio and pulling out a presentation folder. "I've reviewed the documentation your team sent over, and I've identified several critical issues that are contributing to your current logistics failures." The meeting that followed was one of the most professionally satisfying experiences of Marcus's life, not because he was rubbing Richard's face in his success, but because he was genuinely good at what he did. He walked them through a comprehensive analysis of their supply chain, identifying bottlenecks, inefficiencies, and outdated processes that were costing them millions. "Your third-party vendor relationships are poorly managed," Marcus explained, pulling up a chart. "You're paying premium prices for services that could be consolidated or renegotiated. Your inventory forecasting model hasn't been updated in 7 years, which is why you're constantly dealing with either overstocking or shortages." And your communication protocols between departments are creating a 2-day delay on every single order. Jennifer Mills leaned forward, genuinely interested. 2 days? Are you certain? Absolutely certain, Marcus replied. I've mapped out your entire process flow. Every order that comes in has to pass through 6 approval stages, 3 of which are redundant. By restructuring your approval hierarchy and implementing an automated tracking system, you could cut that delay entirely and improve your response time by 48 hours. And the cost? Robert Chen asked, his pen poised over his notepad. Initial implementation would run approximately $200,000, Marcus said. But based on my projections, you'd recoup that investment within 4 months through improved efficiency and reduced overhead. Within a year, you'd see a net savings of approximately $3.5 million. The room went quiet. Even Richard, who'd been maintaining a stony silence throughout the presentation, couldn't hide his reaction to those numbers. That seems optimistic, Richard finally said, his tone skeptical but lacking its usual bite. Marcus met his eyes directly. Mr. Harrington, I don't deal in optimism. I deal in data. Everything I've presented is based on industry-standard metrics applied to your specific situation. If anything, I've been conservative in my estimates to account for implementation challenges. He pulled out another document and slid it across the table. This is a case study from a similar company, same industry, similar size, nearly identical challenges. We implemented this exact strategy 15 months ago. Their efficiency improved by 52%, and their annual profits increased by $8.3 million. Jennifer picked up the document, her eyes widening as she scanned it. This is impressive work, Mr. Bennett. Very impressive. How soon could we begin implementation? Marcus glanced at Richard, whose jaw was clenched so tight it looked painful. That depends on your leadership's commitment to the process. These kinds of restructurings require buy-in from the top down. Everyone from the CEO to the warehouse floor needs to be willing to adapt, to change old habits, to trust in new systems. What about personnel changes? Richard asked abruptly. Would this require layoffs? It was a loaded question, and Marcus knew it. Richard was hoping to find a weakness, a reason to reject the proposal despite its obvious benefits. No layoffs, Marcus said firmly. In fact, part of my recommendation includes investment in employee training and development. Your turnover rate is 23% higher than industry average, which costs you millions in recruitment and training expenses. By improving working conditions, offering competitive wages, and creating clear advancement paths, you'd reduce turnover and increase productivity. Happy employees are productive employees. He paused, letting that philosophy sink in, a direct contradiction to everything Richard believed about management. Some of you might remember when I worked here, Marcus continued, deciding to address the elephant in the room directly. I was a warehouse supervisor. I saw these problems firsthand. I made suggestions, most of which were ignored. I understand this company's culture because I lived it, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that the biggest obstacle to your success isn't your systems or your processes. It's your treatment of the people who make this company run. The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer and Robert exchanged glances. Richard's face had gone pale, then red, emotions warring behind his eyes. I was wrong, Richard said suddenly, the words seeming to cost him physical pain. Everyone turned to look at him. That night, 18 months ago, I was wrong to treat you the way I did. I was wrong to fire you. Marcus hadn't expected this. He'd prepared for hostility, for resistance, even for Richard to reject the proposal entirely. But an apology? That was something else entirely. I told myself it was just business, Richard continued, his voice rough. That personal circumstances didn't matter, that weakness couldn't be tolerated. But watching this presentation, seeing what you've become, what you've accomplished. He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I threw away a valuable employee because I confused desperation with weakness. I failed to see that the man begging me for a chance was exactly the kind of dedicated, resourceful person this company needed. Marcus sat back, processing this unexpected turn. Part of him wanted to accept the apology, to let go of the anger and hurt. But another part, the part that remembered Jamie asking if they were still poor, that remembered Maria Rodriguez giving him her hard-earned money, that remembered kneeling in the rain. That part wanted Richard to understand the full weight of what he'd done. Mr. Harrington, Marcus said carefully, I appreciate the apology, but I need you to understand something. That night, I wasn't just desperate. I was drowning. My wife had just died. I had a 6-year-old son who was going hungry because I couldn't afford groceries. I had given this company everything I had, and when I needed the smallest amount of compassion in return, you threw me away like garbage. Richard flinched, but didn't look away. You didn't just fire an employee that night, Marcus continued. You showed me exactly what kind of leader you were. The kind who measures people's worth by their immediate productivity instead of their character. The kind who sees asking for help as weakness instead of courage. The kind who forgets that every employee is a human being with a life outside these walls. Marcus stood, gathering his materials. I'm going to work with your company because I believe in giving people second chances, something you never gave me. I'm going to help fix your logistics problems because that's what I'm good at, and because your employees deserve to work for a stable, successful company. But I'm not doing it for you, Mr. Harrington. I'm doing it despite you. He walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and one more thing. That cleaning woman who gave me money that night when I had nothing, Maria Rodriguez, she still works here, making minimum wage, working night shifts at 63 years old. My first recommendation for this company is that you give her and every other cleaning staff member a 20% raise and full benefits. Because the true measure of a company isn't in its profit margins, it's in how it treats the people everyone else forgets about. Marcus left the conference room, rode the elevator down to the lobby, and walked out into the Chicago afternoon. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and Marcus felt lighter than he had in years. His phone buzzed, a text from Jamie. How did the big meeting go, Dad? Marcus smiled and typed back, better than I ever imagined. Pizza tonight to celebrate? The response was immediate. Extra cheese! Marcus pocketed his phone and headed toward the subway, not looking back at the building behind him. He'd come here to prove something, to Richard, to himself, maybe to the universe. And he had, not through anger or revenge, but by becoming exactly who he was always meant to be. 3 months after that confrontation in the conference room, Marcus stood outside Jamie's school on a crisp October afternoon, waiting among the other parents for dismissal. The trees were ablaze with autumn colors, and the air carried that particular scent of fallen leaves and approaching winter that always reminded him of new beginnings. His phone buzzed, an email from Jennifer Mills at Harrington Industries. The subject line read, Implementation Results, Month 3. Marcus opened it, scanning the data with practiced efficiency. Efficiency improvements, 58%. Cost reduction, $4.2 million in the first quarter alone. Employee satisfaction scores, up 32%. Turnover rate, down to industry average for the first time in 5 years. But it was the final paragraph that made Marcus smile. Maria Rodriguez has been promoted to head of facilities management with full benefits, retirement package, and a salary of $65,000 annually. She cried when we told her. She asked us to thank you personally. We all do. Mr. Bennett, a voice interrupted his reading. Marcus looked up to see Karen Morrison, David's wife and Jamie's third-grade teacher. She was smiling warmly. Do you have a moment before dismissal? Of course, Marcus said, pocketing his phone. Karen led him a few steps away from the other parents, her expression gentle but serious. I wanted to talk to you about Jamie. He's doing wonderfully in class. His reading has improved dramatically and his math scores are excellent, but more than that. She paused, choosing her words carefully. He's different than he was at the start of the school year. Happier, more confident. He talks about you constantly, you know. My dad has his own company. My dad helps people solve problems. My dad says you can come back from anything if you don't give up. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He's a special kid. He is, Karen agreed, and he has a special father. David told me a little about your story, not everything, just enough to understand what you've overcome. I wanted you to know that it shows, Mr. Bennett, not just in your success, but in how you've raised your son. Jamie knows what struggle looks like, but he also knows what perseverance looks like. That's a gift not many children receive. The school bell rang before Marcus could respond, and within moments, children were pouring out of the building in a chaotic wave of backpacks and excited chatter. Jamie spotted Marcus immediately and ran toward him, his face lit up with pure joy. Dad! Dad! Guess what, Mrs. Morrison said my essay was the best in the class. Jamie crashed into Marcus with the force of a small freight train, wrapping his arms around his father's waist. That's amazing, buddy, Marcus said, ruffling Jamie's hair. What was the essay about? It was about heroes, Jamie said, pulling back to look up at Marcus with those eyes that were so much like Sarah's. I wrote about you, about how you didn't give up even when things were really hard, about how you take care of me and help other people, and how you're the strongest person I know. Marcus knelt down to Jamie's level, not caring that other parents were watching, not caring that his expensive suit pants were getting dusty on the sidewalk. Jamie, I want you to know something. Everything I did, everything I am, it's because of you. You're my hero, kid. You gave me a reason to keep fighting when I wanted to give up. You're the strongest person I know. Jamie hugged him tight, and Marcus held his son, remembering all those dark nights when he'd wondered if they would make it, if he was enough, if love and determination could really overcome impossible odds. Here was his answer, warm and solid in his arms, living proof that they could. Can we get pizza now? Jamie asked, pulling back with a grin that showed a missing front tooth. Actually, Marcus said, standing up and taking Jamie's hand, I have a surprise for you first. Come on. They took the subway to the financial district, Jamie chattering the entire way about school, his friends, a science project about volcanoes. Marcus listened to every word, marveling at how much had changed in 2 years. This confident, happy child had once asked him quietly if they were still poor. Now he talked about the future with the certainty that good things were possible. They stopped in front of a modest but professional office building. The sign out front read, Morrison and Partners, Chicago headquarters, but next to it, newly installed, was another sign, Bennett Consulting, Logistics Innovation Division. What's that? Jamie asked, pointing at the new sign. That, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, is our company, buddy. Well, partly mine and partly Mr. Morrison's, but that sign has our name on it, the Bennett name, your mum's name, our family's name. Jamie stared at the sign, his eyes wide. Really, that's us. That's us, Marcus confirmed. Want to see your dad's office? They rode the elevator to the 6th floor, Jamie bouncing with excitement. The office space was beautiful, large windows, modern furniture, a team of 12 employees working at their desks. Several of them looked up and smiled as Marcus entered, greeting him warmly. This was his team, people he'd hired, trained, trusted. People who believed in the same principles he did, that business success and human dignity weren't opposing forces, but complementary ones. Marcus's office was in the corner, with windows overlooking the city. On his desk sat a framed photo of Sarah, another of Jamie, and a third of him and David Morrison shaking hands on the day they'd signed their partnership agreement. But it was what stood in the corner that made Jamie gasp. A small desk, child-sized, with a nameplate that read, Jamie Bennett, Junior Consultant in Training. "Is that for me?" Jamie asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It's for you," Marcus said. "For whenever you want to come visit Dad at work. You can do your homework here, draw pictures, or just hang out. Because you're part of this too, Jamie. This whole journey, everything we've built, we built it together." Jamie ran to the desk, touching it reverently, then turned to Marcus with tears in his eyes. "I wish Mum could see this." Marcus knelt beside him, pulling Jamie into his arms. "I think she can, buddy. I think she's been watching over us this whole time, making sure we didn't give up. And I think she's proud of us. I know I'm proud of us." And they stayed like that for a long moment, father and son, holding each other in the office that represented everything they'd survived and everything they'd become. Finally, Jamie pulled back, wiping his eyes. "Can we still get pizza?" he asked with a watery smile. Marcus laughed, the sound genuine and free. "Yeah, we can still get pizza. Extra cheese, just like I promised." But before they left, Marcus's phone rang. The screen showed David Morrison's name. Marcus answered, and David's excited voice came through immediately. "Marcus, you need to get down here right now. Conference room. You're not going to believe this." "David, I'm with Jamie." "Bring him," David interrupted. "Trust me, you both need to see this." Curious, Marcus and Jamie headed to the main conference room. Inside, they found David, several board members, and on the video screen, Richard Harrington. But Richard looked different, humbler somehow, less polished, more human. "Mr. Bennett," Richard said, his voice formal but genuine. "Thank you for joining us. I wanted to speak with you personally about something." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "The restructuring you implemented at Harrington Industries has been more successful than anyone imagined. We're not just recovering, we're thriving. Our stock price has rebounded completely. We've won back the contracts we lost and gained 3 new major clients. But more importantly, our people are happier. Productivity is up because morale is up. The culture is changing." Marcus waited, not sure where this was going. "I've done a lot of thinking over these past months," Richard continued, "about leadership, about what makes a company truly successful, about the kind of legacy I want to leave. And I've realized that I've spent 20 years building a company on the wrong foundation. I built it on fear and control, and the belief that people are interchangeable resources. You showed me a different way." Richard took a visible breath. "I'm stepping down as CEO of Harrington Industries. The board has approved my recommendation for my replacement." He looked directly at Marcus through the screen. "You, Mr. Bennett, we want you to take over as CEO." The room fell silent. Marcus felt Jamie's hand tighten in his, felt David's shocked stare, felt the weight of the impossible offer settling over him. "The salary would be $800,000 annually, plus bonuses and stock options," Richard continued. "Full control over company operations, with the authority to implement whatever changes you see fit. The board has already approved a $50 million budget for employee welfare programs, training initiatives, and facility improvements. Everything you talked about that day in the conference room. You'd have the power and resources to make it real." Marcus's mind was racing. CEO of Harrington Industries, the company that had thrown him away, the position that would give him wealth, influence, the ability to help thousands of employees. It was everything he'd never dared to dream. He looked down at Jamie, who was staring up at him with wide, proud eyes, then at David, who was smiling with genuine happiness for his partner's success, then at the video screen, at Richard Harrington's face, which showed something Marcus had never seen there before: respect. "Mr. Harrington," Marcus said slowly, "I'm honored by the offer. Truly. 2 years ago, I would have given anything to hear you say these words, to have this kind of validation." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I'm going to decline." The shock in the room was palpable. Richard's face fell. David looked confused. Even Jamie tugged on his hand questioningly. "I've spent the last 2 years building something that matters," Marcus explained. "Not just a business, but a philosophy. A way of working that puts people first, that proves you can be successful without sacrificing your humanity. If I take over Harrington Industries, I'd be stepping into a role defined by someone else's vision, spending my time fixing someone else's mistakes." He looked at David. "I'd rather spend my time building something new with someone I trust, someone who shares my values. Morrison and Partners, and specifically Bennett Consulting, that's where I belong. That's where I can do the most good, working with companies that want to change, teaching leaders that there's a better way." Marcus turned back to the screen. "Mr. Harrington, I appreciate what you're trying to do. You're trying to make amends, and that's admirable, but the best way you can honor what I taught you isn't by giving me your company. It's by staying there and becoming the leader your employees deserve. Take the principles we implemented and make them the core of who you are as a CEO. That would mean more to me than any position or salary ever could." Richard sat back, processing this, and slowly nodded. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're absolutely right. I tried to take the easy way out, to let someone else fix what I broke. But that's not growth. That's just avoidance." He straightened his shoulders. "I'll stay. And I'll do better. I promise you that, Mr. Bennett. I'll spend the rest of my career proving that people can change." "I believe you can," Marcus said simply. After the call ended, David turned to Marcus with a mixture of amazement and respect. "You just turned down $800,000 and one of the most powerful positions in the industry." "I turned down someone else's dream so I could keep living my own," Marcus corrected gently. "Money and power don't mean anything if you lose yourself getting them. I learned that the hard way." David smiled and extended his hand. "Then let's get back to building our dream, together." They shook hands, partners in every sense of the word, and Marcus felt a profound sense of rightness settle over him. "Dad," Jamie said quietly, "you really said no to all that money?" Marcus knelt down one more time. "Jamie, let me tell you the most important lesson I've ever learned. Success isn't about how much money you make or how powerful you become. It's about staying true to who you are, treating people with dignity, and building something you can be proud of. I'm prouder of what we've built together, you and me, this life, this family, than I ever could be of running someone else's company." Jamie thought about this, his young face serious. Then he smiled. "I'm proud of you too, Dad, and Mom would be too." "Yeah," Marcus said, pulling his son into a hug. "Yeah, she would be." They left the office as the sun was setting over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Marcus held Jamie's hand as they walked toward their favorite pizza place, just a father and son, talking about homework and weekend plans and all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that make up a life. 2 years ago, Marcus had knelt on a rain-soaked street, broken and desperate, wondering if he would survive. Today, he walked in sunshine, whole and hopeful, knowing not just that he'd survived, but that he'd thrived. He'd turned his darkest moment into his greatest transformation. He'd proven that kindness isn't weakness, and that dignity isn't negotiable. He'd shown his son and himself that you can come back from anything if you don't give up. And as they entered the pizza place, Jamie chattering excitedly about extra cheese and breadsticks, Marcus looked up at the sky and whispered, "We did it, Sarah. We really did it." Somewhere he knew she was smiling. The journey from that rainy night to this golden evening hadn't been easy. It had been filled with struggle, doubt, and moments when giving up seemed like the only option. But Marcus had learned that the hardest journeys often lead to the most beautiful destinations. That sometimes you have to lose everything to discover who you really are. That the people who count you out are often the ones who push you to become more than you ever imagined. Richard Harrington had meant to destroy him that night in the rain. Instead, he'd forged him into something stronger, something better, something unstoppable. And that, Marcus thought, as he watched Jamie order their pizza with the confidence of a child who'd never doubt he'd have enough to eat, was the greatest victory of all. Not revenge, not wealth, not power, but peace, purpose, and the knowledge that he'd raised a son who understood that true success is measured not in what you take from the world, but in what you give back to it. The pizza arrived, extra cheese just as promised, and Marcus and Jamie ate together, laughing and talking, two survivors who'd found their way home to each other and to themselves. And outside, the city lights began to twinkle on, one by one, like stars coming out after a storm, illuminating a world full of possibility for those brave enough to reach for it.